right, go ahead. What you got, boss?
Okay, so where have we left off? So we have
We're getting
left
ready to
off.
show. Okay, go ahead.
Left off with the uprising or the rebellion in Serbia.
Yes.
I'm going into it in greater detail, perhaps because it really affected the Germans the most. In 1941, okay, so the uprising in Croatia was the fight was mostly rebel Serbs versus the pro-Axis Croats and Bosniaks. While in Montenegro, there was a fierce uprising of today you would call them Serbs and Montenegrins. Then they were Serbs. And it was an uprising against
the Italians, right?
Exactly. It was against the Italians. Okay. So this uprising in Montenegro was, depends how you look at it. It was potentially, you can look at it as being highly successful because it actually toppled this government that the Italians wanted to institute.
Wow, okay, that's good to know.
Yes. So the Italians backtracked a little bit.
Yeah, they did.
On the other hand, it was, from the standpoint of the communists, it was unsuccessful because it did not lead to a permanent war against the Italians.
No, it did not. So were the Italians able to put that down, or they didn't give up Montenegro, right?
No, of course not. They mounted a counteroffensive within 1 month.
Okay.
And, well, I wouldn't say they crushed the uprising. I would say that they pushed back the guerrilla forces back into the mountains, and but because ultimately Italy went back on its plan to institute an independent Montenegro, the nationalist rebels decided that, okay, we have won, and we don't have
were the Italians
to fight
trying to make
anymore.
everything? Were the Italians trying to make everything kind of independent there?
Oh, they wanted to make their own puppet state.
Right, but the Germans didn't really do that in Bosnia. Well, I guess I left that to the Croat. Okay, anyway, that's near future. That's not right now, though.
So actually, the Italians wanted to do something that is relatively similar to what the Italians and Germans did in Croatia. So they made a puppet state. However, it simply, it simply riled up the people, and the people quickly revolted, and the state, the plan was shelved, for better times.
So I guess when they have their uprising, it's anti-Axis, but it's not really communist. It's just anti-Axis. That's all it is. It had nothing to do with the communists initially, right?
Well, it had to do with the communists because communists participated. There is an argumentation that the communists led the revolt. However, for instance, I read the book Tito's biography by a prominent communist, where he basically admits that this is not a communist revolt. This was a general revolt, and the communists participated. They wanted to take control of it, of course.
Yeah.
But it would be very far-fetched to say that they actually led the revolt. But they
succeeded a couple of years later, right? Like in 43, 44, it was actually a communist state at that point, wasn't it? More or less? That's way later.
There was a communist. It is very difficult to say. For instance, the communists wanted to make a communist state all of the time. So
right. Yeah, of course. That's what
they set up a republic. The Axis forces or the Chetniks come in and they kick them out. So, it's how it works. Ultimately, their control is very, how should I say it? It's very fluid. It's not very fixed.
Yeah. No, I don't think their control got fixed probably till 44, maybe at the earliest.
Yeah,
they were still.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were still scrambling around trying to just get their head of steam going on, and they got smacked all the time there for a while.
Yes, and this is something that goes through to the communist tactics. The Chetniks did not. Well, they did have liberated territories, but they didn't proclaim.
Right.
Of course, they wouldn't proclaim any republics in general, but they wouldn't be very vocal about their liberated territories because they know this is an Axis magnet. So.
Oh yeah, big time. In fact, it's kind of funny because it really goes straight to what the game was between the Chetniks and Tito, because Tito really just wanted to set up a state, a government, like an infrastructure, whereas the Chetniks just wanted to survive the war with as many people as they could, so they could kind of keep their population going or keep their power base up.
Exactly.
At least that's my interpretation of it.
Yes, exactly. And furthermore, the Chetniks really don't need to set up any kind of government because there's already a local government in place, which is inherited from the Yugoslav kingdom, and of course the Chetniks are not going to change it. Ultimately, the Chetniks sometimes, they catch a couple of collaborators, get rid of them and things like that. But ultimately, they're going to keep the government and in the administration in general. Not the government, because the government is a couple of people. But when I'm talking about the government, I mean the administration of the country. So they're not going to fundamentally change it. They're going to get rid of people, and they're going to probably, try and potentially shoot some people that collaborated with the Germans openly. But otherwise than that, they'll be keeping the same system. The communists wanted to get rid of everybody, and so their point was that you all collaborated with the Germans, so we can get rid of all of you. Of course, this is a communist, how should I say? This is a communist construction. It's, real things and real life is something different. But anyways, this is their, argumentation.
Well, it's actually funny because based on World War I, they were kind of enemies, but they're not. I mean, it's not World War I. This is 30 years later. So the things have shifted a bit. There wasn't really anybody helping the Chetniks out originally, so they kind of had to survive on their own without any real support in 41.
Yes, and ultimately the Chetniks will be looking to. This is the whole story about the legalization tactics of the Chetniks and so on and so forth. They will be looking forward to legalization is an umbrella term for various tactics which were being used to somehow either neutralize the Axis forces or to utilize the Axis forces in terms of getting them off your back, and second of all, getting ammunition and so on and so forth. So we will be getting into this when we discuss 1942, because ultimately a lot of the legalization tactics was not just it was not just forced by the pressure from the Axis. It was also forced by the rift with the partisans.
Oh, interesting. All right, did you get that file going that you were looking for?
Oh yes, I found it. Okay, let me get back to our map of the operations.
So the black spots are Axis forces, I guess.
Well, those would be the Germans, basically.
Germans. I'm sorry, yeah, because the Germans. All right, yeah, Germans.
Yeah. So this is German territory.
Yeah, you're in the German sector here, so yeah.
Yeah, of course there would be Serb collaborators, there would be Croat collaborators, there would be Bulgarians, but ultimately.
Bulgarians, jeez.
Yeah, but so for instance, what's interesting? For instance, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people know about, I don't know, Neretva, Sutjeska, Operation Schwartz, and things like that. There was a lot of
those are the big ones.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Germans involved that they were chasing the partisans and whatnot. Here in the fall of 1941, when you look at it, there are 3 second-line divisions, and they were reinforced by 2 first-line divisions, 2.5 actually.
Oh,
First-line
really?
divisions.
Wow.
So this is a
Okay.
German concentration that is completely off the charts. It's Neretva and
Yeah.
Sutjeska pale towards, in comparison with this, because this is, first of all, this is the fall of 1941, a very, very sensitive time for the Germans, for one
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
and for the other, it's a huge concentration of German forces and a huge dilution of their power.
It's
Okay,
almost a core, I think, right? I think it's close to a core in strength.
maybe
You
even
basically
2.
have the equivalent of like 3.5 divisions here, I guess. That's almost
No.
a core.
We have an equivalent of 5.5 divisions.
Oh, that is a core then, maybe a core and a half. Oh, that's a
Yes.
lot. Okay.
Okay, well, half of them are second line, while half of them are
Right.
first line divisions.
So what's kind of funny, it's almost the same amount of force they had in North Africa, isn't it? Actually.
Actually, it might be more.
It depends on how you slice the Italian divisions, but yeah, it's
No,
more,
no, no. Well, okay.
more German troops.
Listen, for us serious people, we only count the Germans.
Oh, yeah, fair enough, because, yeah, okay. We don't need to discuss that, but let's just say the Italians didn't really do a ton of offensive actions. They did some, but nothing like the Germans.
Well, your comparison is very, very apt. Yes, in North Africa, there were like 2 or 3 divisions. Well, okay, of course, 2 of them were Panzer divisions. So this is, of course, in terms of the value, North Africa is far, far more valuable.
Yeah, that's true, because there probably weren't any. I don't think there were any Panzer divisions here. I'm sure there were tanks, but they wouldn't have been like any of the frontline tanks. It would have been like the captured ones, the Czech tanks, the French tanks.
Exactly. They were captured French tanks. So, but ultimately, of course, when you also look at it, I mean, 2.5 frontline divisions is 2.5 frontline divisions. It's nothing to sneeze at.
No, not at all.
So what happens here is that I have drawn a map that is probably at the early or exact point of the German counterattack. So this would be the high water mark of the uprising.
Oh, this is right before the Germans start beating it back. Okay.
Exactly. So there were a number of fights around several cities. From going from north to south, it would be the city of Shabac, with the cemeteries next to it, the city of Valjevo, the city of Čačak with the Chetnik and Partisan siege. And there was also attack on the city of Kruševac, but ultimately it was not successful, and these forces joined the siege of Kraljevo. Of all of these, I guess the most interesting ones would be the fights on Shabac and Kraljevo. The Kraljevo being actually a siege that lasted for some 3 or 4 weeks, actually, where 3,000 Germans were basically surrounded by a double number of rebels, most of them Chetniks. And but this siege was ultimately unsuccessful. You can only imagine. You can only imagine, if they were successful and they managed to get a hold of 3,000 German prisoners.
Oh, well, 3,000 soon-to-be dead Germans, maybe.
Oh, no.
Actually, I don't think they weren't really nasty to Germans then.
No. The Chetniks observed the rules of war, and they wouldn't shoot German prisoners. For the partisans, though, that's another story.
Yeah, they just kind of ignored all that. In fact, they seemed to wanted to create more chaos to kind of make their takeover attempt go a little bit smoother.
Exactly, because there is a German policy that was proclaimed, and the policy is for every one German killed, we will kill 100 Serbs, and for every one German wounded, we will kill 50 Serbs.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're going to make a lot of friends with that policy, that's for sure.
Well, ultimately they enforced this policy.
Yeah, they sure did.
So ultimately what the Chetniks always tried to avoid German casualties in terms of killed and wounded, and tried to take as many prisoners as they could because they would ultimately serve as bargaining chips.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. However, this policy, this mass shooting, is something that the partisans wanted to encourage because it would generate more chaos. And in a situation of chaos, a situation of complete chaos, this is something that they thought that they could exploit. And if you have a ruined country, that a lot of people would become proletarians, and they would naturally gravitate towards Tito. So you have a very apt observation by David Martin, the author, who said that a village that was intact helped the strength of Mihailovic, while a village that was burned helped Tito.
Oh, interesting.
So ultimately,
it's funny because on the face of it, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but then when you look at their end goal of like they're trying to make the existing government lose face and look bad, so it's like, well, we don't trust this existing government. Tito must be better because we're getting blown up in the existing government, not kind of realizing that Tito's kind of making this destruction happen, or he's encouraging the destruction.
Yes, and people become dispossessed. They become desperate. So this is something that the communists wanted to exploit, cause and exploit. Of course,
see, that's funny. It's a kind of the same thing that happened in Vietnam too. When we were trying to resettle all the villagers into places that you could actually kind of keep an eye on them. Well, you took them away from their land. Now they're dispossessed, unsettled, and then you concentrate them. So it's like, oh, so you made all these guys angry. Then you put them all together, and you think they're going to like this. No, they're probably just going to become even angry because now they can talk to each other and kind of become even more agitated because, oh, you took mine, you took mine, you took mine, and then they all kind of like it turns the whole thing on its head is what happens.
Exactly. Again, I mean, I'm not going to say any good things about the American army in Vietnam. But here you got the German army, and they shoot people. The Americans also shoot people, I guess, more in hot blood. And okay, they do the whole Agent Orange thing, and they're not nice by any account. But the Germans are very open about this. If you try anything, we'll just simply brutally shoot you, and that's it. And they actually enforced the quota, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So
okay, was that in place during these fights then in 41, or was that something that came a little later?
Exactly, and this was a complete. It caused a complete shock, I guess, because ultimately, of course, Tito expected this, and ultimately, Mihailovic, when he gave into the will of everybody to fight, he said, okay, but this is going to cause hardship, but it is what it is. And and what happened is that everybody was, on the Chetnik side, was horrified when the Germans started to actually implement their reprisals, as written down. Everybody was expecting for the Germans to be brutal, but the actual extent of the brutality was something that simply horrified, of course, the nationalist side, because, obviously, as a soldier, your first instinct is that you need to protect your people.
Right.
And ultimately, if you're fighting and this causes civilian casualties, this is something that works against you. Of course, if you're a proletarian communist, this is something that you're unfazed with. So what happens is
some things never change. All right. Anyway, go ahead.
So funny, but something that is interesting, and there's something that the communists, don't like when it's mentioned, is that Tito was sitting in Užice. Now, Užice was the biggest town that was free at that point, but it was not actually liberated from the Germans. The partisans, the Germans vacated Užice because they decided it was not defendable, and they withdrew from Čačak to Kraljevo. So,
Oh, so they just shortened their supply lines, and then when they did that, it kind of was a nice thing for the Chetniks, I guess, because they moved in there, right? Pretty much.
It was the nice thing for the partisans because, as we discussed earlier, the Chetniks, they don't want to implement and institute another government.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's funny because when I read about that, they made it sound like that Užice was a Chetnik idea, but it's actually not, huh?
Well, the Užice was, it's nobody's idea exactly. It was like what happened was ultimately both partisan and Chetnik units were near Užice when the Germans left. So the Chetniks went to the front, and the partisans went to Užice and instituted their own government there. So
that's what happened. Okay.
Well, yes, this is not something. Užice was not liberated from the Germans. So what happens is now that you actually have a front line, and when you look at that front line, it's mostly kept by the Chetnik units.
Oh yeah.
And Tito,
so all the blue here are Chetniks, right? All the blue lines are Chetniks.
Yes.
And then the partisans only have like 1 or 2 spaces, huh?
Yes.
Actually, I guess they have 3 spaces.
Yes, they have 2 major how should I say, power centers. One, one is in the region of Valjevo, and one is in the region of Užice.
Okay, so what was the one in like northeast of there? The one outside of Krakow? I guess that's what that city is.
Valjevo, yes, Valjevo. So this is their second power base near Valjevo, and this is some they had a relatively significant strength there. However, their main force is in Užice, and Tito is there. And they start setting up their government. And they also start slowly removing their units from the front and concentrating them in Užice.
Jeez. Okay.
Of course, Mihailovic is not exactly blind. He can see what is happening. It's just that the problem is the rational thing for Mihailovic to do at the moment when the partisan units started appearing was to disarm them and shoot the communist leadership. This was something, this is something that is both rational and legally, he's legally obliged to do it, because obviously they're up to no good. If somebody wants to, if somebody wants to make a liberation movement, that's, politically that's fine, but ultimately you need to be under army leadership, or you're a rebel. You are a armed rebel against the country. So there is a whole angle that is being overlooked there. The fact is that Mihailovic is somebody who is a soldier and he leads army units, while Tito is somebody who is a politician and he leads basically a paramilitary outfit, which is furthermore even illegal in Yugoslavia.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah, because at that point, Mihailovic is pretty much the designated. I won't say he's really the ruler, because the king is in exile in England, but he's pretty much the king's representative in Yugoslavia at this time. So he's pretty much the head of the government, right?
At that point, he was not appointed the minister of war. That happened a couple of months later.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He's kind of like the general of the army at this point, or something along whatever that equivalent would be here.
He is a member of the army, and he's operating under command to wage a guerrilla war against the occupiers. So this is something when the army mostly surrendered, the government left the country, but it authorized some people to lead the guerrilla war against, of course, the occupiers, because this is something that was supposed to be done all the time. That is why the Chetnik units were formed by the Yugoslav government. So the army had Chetnik units, which were the equivalent of your Green Berets, while, well, for instance, so let me just, in terms of this, clarify, not all Chetniks are equivalent of Green Berets. The Chetnik battalions, which were 5 of them, were the equivalent, while various Chetnik units were of varying degree of proficiency. Some were simple militia.
I think in war gamer terms, it'd be like the police force as opposed to like a military force. They'd be like police units instead of well, they're not even second-tier units, are they?
In terms of well, actually, we're going to discuss this when they fight the Axis. They're very good.
Well, yeah, the motivation's in place. You're basically fighting to free your homeland when you're fighting the Axis.
When they fight the partisans, they're kind of terrible. But, you know, I digress.
Well, yeah, because, well, I mean, it's the same thing that would happen in anything where you're fighting your countrymen. It's like you're fighting an occupier versus your countrymen. It's like, well, I don't really feel so good about shooting my countrymen, but I'm happy to shoot the Germans, for example.
So, yeah, exactly. So this is something that works against the Chetniks. Also, it ultimately also works against the partisans. So this is why Tito would need to make his own personal shock units loyal to the communist cause.
Oh boy, that's way down the road. I don't want to hear about that, but that's like many episodes from now.
Yeah, it's a couple of months from here.
Yeah. Well, I have a little bit of bad news for you. I only got about 15 minutes left before I got to go to a meeting.
Okay,
so I don't know how much time you're planning on taking, but you got like 15, so go ahead.
Okay, so what happens? The Germans counterattack. They counterattack in force. They push the Chetnik units back. They push them from various cities, and ultimately the Chetniks and the partisans start fighting. The Chetniks want to make a spoiling attack against the partisans in Užice. It's unsuccessful, and ultimately Mihailovic finds himself surrounded on one side by the partisans and on the other side by the Germans.
Oh man, what a mess.
Now, where did we left off last week? I think that the partisans and Chetniks were just starting to fight each other.
Yeah, that's where we got to. And you were just talking about how they were trying to move in to kind of take over this nascent rebellion that was going on here.
Well, in essence, the two sides had, you know, different priorities. For the Chetniks, this was essentially a strategic loss, strategically a bad idea. But they did it anyway because of the national pressure, because of the popular pressure, because everybody wanted to fight the Germans.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and for the partisans, it was basically both a play to help the Soviet Union and also a power play. So they basically wanted to achieve both aims by first steering up the rebellion, and secondly by letting the Chetniks fight the Germans, you know, and the Chetniks exhausting themselves.
Well, that's a good strategy, actually. It's a very sound strategy. In fact, at that point, it was probably the thing to do because they didn't really have a big force to begin with. So if you whittle down your opponent, you kind of win by proxy because they become weaker.
That is correct, because in terms of the tactical side, because ultimately, sometime late in the rebellion, the partisans got stronger. So up to that point,
during this rebellion or a different rebellion, during the 41 rebellion,
the Serbian fall of the 1941 rebellion.
Right, but you were saying that the partisans got stronger during the rebellion, but during this one or future rebellions?
Yes, during this one.
Oh, okay, that'd be interesting to hear about. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, what they did was, first of all, the Chetniks are mostly in the front lines.
Right.
They're fighting the Germans, so this whittles down their strength. Secondly, the partisans want to take hold of the rear areas and mobilize people there. So this is all something that helps the strength of the partisans, while
Right.
of course it reduces the strength of the Chetniks.
Yeah. Oh, so question for you on that point right there. So I think this is a finite resource these two sides can tap into the Serbian population, but the non-Serbian population it's not a zero-sum game, I'm assuming. I don't think so. Do you know what I mean by that? Well, so I'll give you an example. Sake of argument, there's 50 Serbian people you can recruit, period. So Chetniks and partisans are recruiting from the same side. So if the partisans get 30 Serbians on their side, there's only 20 left to be on the Chetnik side. However, if you take the rest of the population out, you take the Serbians out and whatever remains behind, which is 40% of the country, I guess, roughly. So this group is really super flexible because I think in general, they're probably not really lined up with the Chetniks too much, right? I mean, I don't know. You'd have to tell me. That makes sense, or is that a little weird?
For once, let me put it this way: there's math, and there's also political math. So mathematically, what you are saying, of course, makes complete sense, and it's even worse for the Serbs because a lot of the fighting age Serb population is in prison camps, in POW camps.
Oh, right, yeah, because they were just invaded, and then the Germans captured a bunch. Okay.
So that what you're saying, of course, makes sense. Mathematically speaking, you would like to get the Croats or the Bosniaks on board to fight the Germans. But what makes sense mathematically, politically, it really doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
good luck getting.
Yeah, that's very true.
Good luck getting them both to fight the Germans. So.
Well, the funny thing is that these guys are kind of switch sides depending upon which way the wind's blowing. So
exactly.
Sometimes they'll fight the Germans. Sometimes they won't fight the Germans. Sometimes they'll fight each other and ignore the Germans. And then, of course, in the case of some parts of the country, the Germans aren't even there. It's like, well, we don't care about the Germans. They're not messing with us at all. If you're in like some of the more rural areas.
Well, look, let's put it this way. In terms of fighting the Germans, there is really no actual option aside from Serbs and maybe Slovenes, and a big maybe there.
Oh, okay, that's different.
In terms of fighting for instance, Bulgarians, for a lot of the Macedonians, probably most of the Macedonians, that's really not an option.
Right.
They don't really care. They don't want to fight the Bulgarians. Yeah. A lot of them think they're Bulgarians. So, while the Communist Party got a lot of votes in Macedonia in 2 decades ago, they're not going to start a rebellion against the Bulgarians. It's not happening. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
The 500,000 of Germans, they're not really going to fight the Germans, of course.
No, so that would be the guys like in, I forgot what the name of that group is, but they pretty much live in like northern Serbia or northern
exactly.
Yugoslavia,
It's the Volksdeutsche, and they live in the area of Banat. This is right north of Belgrade.
Oh, so actually, these guys might actually, are these kind of like, will they become German troops, or are they more like the Quislings that you're talking about in your game? I think they're more like the Quislings. Not
No,
quite.
they're German. They're German troops. Probably one of their best troops engaged here.
Oh,
the SS Prince Eugen Division.
Oh, that's where they're from.
Yeah. So good luck.
Guys,
you know,
these guys were terrors. These guys were terrors of Yugoslavia. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So they're not going to fight the Germans. The Hungarians are really not going to fight the Axis.
Right.
So the Albanian minority in the area of Kosovo and Macedonia, they're not going to fight the Axis. Quite the contrary.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So there you go. You have, I think, 15 million Yugoslavs, but a lot of them, I mean, technically they're Yugoslavs, but they're not going to fight the Germans. They're not going to fight the Axis. You know, some Croats might fight the Italians, for instance.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean,
yeah.
Well, oh, that's right. They probably would, because they're kind of fighting over the same territory, really. Italians
exactly.
And Croats.
So that's very, you know, in terms of recruitment, it's very limited if you want to recruit people to fight the Axis. If you want to recruit people to fight the Serbs, well, you got a better shot there.
Oh, that's where Tito kind of made his bones, was getting the people to fight the Serbs at some point. Probably not so much in this particular example, but I think in the later revolts it was a bigger issue, right? Or I mean, were they fighting against the Serbs here in this one? I think they were. That's your point, right?
Well, in this one, it's mostly Serbs on either side, aside from the Spanish War veterans, which were Yugoslavs or international or whatever.
Right.
But these would be the officer and NCO equivalent of the partisan side. So their leadership is international or you know, broader base, but their rank and file are mostly Serbs. And the intention is, of course, with the partisans, is that their rank and file should be ultimately fighting the Chetniks. Of course.
Yeah. There you go. There it is, right there.
This is a rational calculation in terms of if you want to grab power, if you want to fight the Axis and help the Allies. This is completely, you know, it's a complete nonsense. But if you're aiming to achieve power, in that case, you really want to get rid of the Chetniks because they are the army. They represent the army, the government, the government in London, and everything else. So
when you go through this whole thing, it really kind of winds up being like political choices versus resistance choices, because you don't necessarily want the Germans in there, but a lot of people don't care the Germans are there at all. So as far as Tito goes, it's like, well, I don't really care so much about the Germans. I want to get rid of these Chetniks. It's kind of convenient for me to start some nonsense between the Germans and the Chetniks, because the more these guys fight, the less I have to fight the Chetniks. Wow.
Indeed. And ultimately what happens is, because of this position of the communists, ultimately this guerrilla fight, which Mihailovic originally started as a guerrilla fight against the Germans and against the Axis, more and more, of course, particularly because of the Ustasha crimes and massacres, and also because of the existence of the partisans, it less and less becomes a fight against the occupiers and more of a fight of Yugoslavs amongst themselves.
Oh, that's actually funny, because all the Germans they just want Yugoslavia to be kind of mellow, and they want to take the resources out and not have to really dedicate a lot to hold the place. So as long as these two factions aren't really stirring up too much trouble, the Germans don't really care too much. But then when they start getting out of control, they start disrupting the German resources and control. Well, then the Germans have to kind of step on it. It's like, okay, you guys are fighting too much. Now I got to step on you because you're wrecking what we're doing here. Man, that's a real pickle.
But ultimately, when you look at it, I know that people know a lot about the Battle of Neretva or Sutjeska because of the movies and things like that. But when you look at it, the most dangerous moment for the Germans is this one, the fall of 1941, and that's the moment when the Chetniks and the partisans are at least ostensibly cooperating against the Germans.
Right.
And at this moment, the Germans have to send in 5.5 divisions.
Ooh, really?
Real actual German divisions.
So these are guys that could have been going on the Eastern Front, but they had to come to the Balkans instead because of all because of the rebellion.
Well, to be precise, half of them were frontline units, while the other half or a third were second line units or garrison units. But
that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of traditionally what you do in guerrilla warfare. You don't put frontline troops in there initially, but still. Yes. Now they have to bring back real forces to deal with these guys.
Yes. So ultimately, of course, this is also the fall of 1941. It's a very crucial moment for the Germans. So for everything that you know about the Yugoslav war, this is actually a far more critical moment for the Germans than 1942 or 1943, when it's basically all over. Everything hangs in the balance still in 1941, and this is the point where there's still some kind of cooperation between the Serbs. Ultimately, because of the existence of the partisans and their special aims, this cooperation falls apart, and they start infighting, and the Germans could breathe more easily once they start infighting.
That's funny because that's the same thing that happened in China too. The Chinese government and the communists really kind of disagreed, and they were fighting each other almost as much as they were fighting the Japanese. Huh.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
So how did they actually put this one down? Because it sounds like it'd be a real mess, but yet the Germans somehow still managed to get a grip on these guys.
Okay, so let me quote a sentence from a German commander.
That thing's broken. I'm starting to see why no one's ever really dug into this too much, because it's really confusing. Really confusing.
It is, and also because it goes against standard narratives. Yeah. Okay, so what happens is the Germans at some point, first of all, during the summer, they thought this was a communist uprising, and they were like, okay, we have 3 divisions here, we have some local collaborators, we'll deal with this. It's not a big deal. Couple of months later, reports start coming in on what's actually happening, and the Germans decide, wait, this is not a communist uprising, this is a general Serb uprising, and we're in trouble. So our assumptions were wrong. And at this point, the Germans are thinking either of these things. Either they will leave the Western Serbia in the state of rebellion and unoccupied, because this is a mountainous area, it's very difficult area, and just leave it be. The other option is to come in with brute force, kill everybody, and pacify the region.
Oh, that works every time.
Well, they appointed a certain Franz Böhme, who's actually an Austrian.
Oh.
And he is the head of the punitive expedition of Germans in Serbia.
Wow. this doesn't sound good. Okay.
So this is a quote from his, I don't know, mission statement or a statement to the troops or whatever.
Okay.
But bear in mind, the Serbs thrashed the Austrians in 1914.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this is important. So this is important, you know, so they're sending in an Austrian who has a grudge, you know, to deal with this.
Yeah,
So,
he does.
This is what he said. Your mission is to march through a country where rivers of German blood were spilled in 1941 due to the perfidy of Serb men and women. You are the avengers of those dead. The whole of Serbia should be a terrifying example of civilian suffering.
Yeah, let's see. So they are definitely not on a hearts and minds campaign. Definitely not.
No, no. So when the dust settles, they have of course destroyed the uprising.
Oh yeah.
And they have killed some 30,000 Serbs, or Serbs,
30,000.
Jews and Roma.
Oh man! And then of course the thing that people always get wrong. Now you've created a bunch of enemies where you didn't have any before.
Well, this would be one way to look at it. The other way to look at it would be, you know, they pacified everything.
Okay, but for how long? So now you got a bunch of people who are just waiting for a chance to come after you again. And I'm sure that in the follow-on revolutions, they were probably more than happy to dig in and come after you, I would guess.
They would have to wait a long time, but in terms of
2 years, basically.
Yeah. In terms of achieving your objective, you have achieved it. You have destroyed the uprising.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, congratulations, mission accomplished. And actually, I'm assuming that it was mostly quiet as far as the Germans go for the next couple of years after this.
And it was quiet in terms of major operations.
Right. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other stuff going on, but nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing to this scale. Because I don't think it's until 43 where things get really hot and heavy to this degree. I think, right?
In Serbia, no. In Serbia, it's going to be mostly pacified because number one, you know what's going to happen if you just start operations against the Germans, and number two, because the Germans would be keeping a lot of forces in Serbia in 1942 and 1943.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because I'd assume, and wrongly, I guess, that after this was over, they pulled the guys out. But apparently, well, they would have pulled some of them out, but they actually left probably half of them behind, I would guess.
I think that you're basically correct. So what happens is after this rebellion is crushed, they leave the three garrison divisions which were already there, and they leave one frontline division and they send it across the river into Bosnia, where there's also liberated territory.
Oh, interesting. So this is, wow, that's what is that area? It's around it's on the eastern border of Serbia, right? Or the western border and north of Macedonia. What do they call that area right there?
Well, this uprising happened in the area which is mostly called Šumadija. Okay.
Wasn't there an uprising going on a little further south of there too, though, I think? Or is this a different thing?
Also in Montenegro, also in eastern Bosnia, also in some territories of Croatia.
Oh, so they were uprising all over the place. Okay.
Of course. What happens here? So what happens here, the Germans made a two-pronged counterattack. One from the area against the Kraljevo siege, and one from the area of Šabac against Loznica and furthermore against the Cer Mountain. Now, of course, these are tactical considerations and operations, and actually, this prong against the Cer Mountain was actually delayed for quite a long time, for some 3 weeks, by the Chetnik forces there. But ultimately, it was just a delaying action that you can't defeat a full German division. It's simply not happening.
No, you might catch one or pummel one a bit, but you're not going to beat them all. No chance. Not really.
Exactly. And ultimately what happens is that at some point Mihailovic finds himself surrounded by both the Germans and the partisans.
Oh, boy. So I have to guess. So if you're in this predicament and you're Mihailovic and you have to go somewhere, you can't really beat the Germans, so I guess you go fight the partisans because you want to get out of the stranglehold that you're in?
You're in a world of hurt. What you do is you try to delay both. So you talk to the Germans, you talk to the partisans.
Oh, and that starts the rumors of all the collaboration, which, quite frankly, I'd be stunned if both sides didn't collaborate to some point or another just for survival.
Of course, it's kind of nonsensical theme, generally speaking, but we'll get to the collaboration when we talk a little bit more about 1942.
Oh yeah, I realize we're not quite there yet, but yeah, this will definitely be a really solid point for our next block of conversation. Actually,
yeah,
the post revolt, the post first. So, what did you call this revolt? What is the name of this particular period here?
The communist historians call it the Republike Nužice.
Okay. And then that pretty much disappeared by the end of 41, right? Because the Germans smashed it all, I assume.
Okay. For the nationalist and pro-Chetnik historians, this is the third Serbian uprising.
The third Serbian?
Okay. Yeah, because there were two uprisings against the Turks in the 19th century.
Oh, you're talking about okay, yeah, that makes sense. So so this is a source of national identity, national pride, that you're always fighting your invaders and Turks and then Germans, huh? Okay.
Of course.
Well, how did World War I fit in there? Because that wasn't really a revolt. Well, you're actually fighting the Germans at that point. It's a regular war during World War I.
Well, actually, the World War I is probably the source of the greatest pride in terms of Serbian history.
Oh, absolutely, because you held them off for a number of years, actually, and that was quite the front during World War I. I don't really know that one super well, but I know that the Germans and Austrians were held off for quite a while. Eventually they drove the Serbians out, but they were able to come back because the Allies had to help them out finally.
Yes. So, at one point I'll be happy to go into discussion on this one, but this will be a lot of episodes down the line. But
right, that's not here.
Also, please bear in mind, for the Serbs, for the Chetniks, for the soldiers, for the officers, World War I was their last war, and their lessons were derived from World War I. World War I also contained a failed rebellion, a failed uprising behind the enemy lines, which was not supported by the army and which was premature. And it was a valuable lesson in keeping patient and not starting a frontal attack with the guerrilla forces too early. For the communists,
that actually makes sense of what Mihailovic was doing, because most of his experience would have come from World War I fighting, so he probably was making sure that he conserved his forces for the second swing, because let's face it, there's not a lot of Serbians to be fighting the entire German army, so you kind of have to pick and choose your fights very carefully.
Exactly. And for the communists, on the other side, their last war was the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, right. These are different lessons.
Exactly. where they got beat up by a certain colonel.
Let me guess.
And they
Colonel
come.
Mihailovic?
No, well, it's he's called Franco, and here it's Mihailovic, but it's a colonel, who'd know the difference, of course.
Yeah.
And obviously, because he's a colonel, he has to work with the Germans, because Franco worked with the Germans, so Mihailovic obviously works with the Germans. These are all reactionary forces, and blah 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 blah, and then you get where you got.
How the heck do you model that? Hey, this will be interesting to figure out how to model that in a. Well, you've kind of done it in your game now.
Well, ultimately, what happens here is Mihailovic talks to both.
Yep.
Of course, this is there's a huge question mark on if he was able to talk to both and be surrounded by both. So
the way this goes, I mean, they didn't wipe him out, so he must have pulled something off.
Yes, but who was fighting the Germans up to that point if he's surrounded by Germans on one side and the communists on the other? Yeah,
well,
it's a complete. Yeah, it's a completely legitimate question, which brings down the whole discussion on his collaboration in 1941 and so on and so forth.
That's
he was on the
kind
front
of funny
line
because, if you look at the results and kind of what happened, it almost looks like the partisans were collaborating with the Germans, maybe not like officially, but by not taking action against the Germans, it actually wound up being kind of helping the Germans, which that's what collaboration is. It's helping your opponent.
Well, ultimately, at this point, they're supposedly participating in the revolt, but their behavior is not congruent with this. If they were participating in the revolt, they wouldn't be keeping their main force in Užice, and they wouldn't be removing units from the front to send them to Užice. They would be sending units from Užice to the front.
Yeah, which they weren't doing. Boy. Funny, I'm sure the history has a different story on that topic. At least,
depends on which history.
Yeah,
on who's.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to say the Serbian historians must be having a bit of a field day trying to peel back some of the communist stuff at this point. So you guys must be having a good time with all that.
You wouldn't even imagine. The current political climate here is that Chetniks, partisans, it's all good. They're all Serbs. It's all good, but ultimately you won't learn any lessons that way.
No, you got to figure out why people did what they were doing.
Exactly. And how to prevent it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I need to wrap this up here shortly. So can we have a conclusion here in the next 5 minutes? I think we got it mostly covered, right? I think.
Yes. What happens now, in very shortly, is Mihailovic is, of course, his forces are hard pressed because they found themselves between the Germans and the partisans, and he decides to take or to order his forces to split up into smaller groups, and he's essentially take to the forests and leave the front, and split up into smaller guerrilla forces. Which means that it's now also some of his forces are sent over the river to fight Ustaše in eastern Bosnia, which all means now that the Chetniks are mostly gone and that partisans are the ones that are left to fight the Germans directly.
Oh, interesting. So did the Germans actually fight them at this point?
If you call that a fight.
Okay, that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah. So for the first time Tito himself was left to in a fight situation with the Germans, direct fight situation with the Germans, and he immediately decided to retreat to the Italian zone.
Oh, interesting. So the Italians weren't really coming after him at this point.
No. It's just the Germans from the German side. The Germans basically made short work of the partisan units, which were completely unprepared to fight them. It simply goes to the whole story of Chetniks being soldiers and partisans being paramilitaries. The partisans have an edge when they need to fight the Chetniks, because the Chetniks are simply not in the civil war mindset yet.
No.
But when the partisans need to start to fight the Germans, it suddenly becomes clear that they have a lack of officers, lack of real leadership and training, and well, they're mostly slaughtered.
See, that's interesting, because military-wise, the Chetniks were the better force at this point. But then over the course of the next couple of years, it's kind of flip-flopped a bit. Well, that's only because the Chetniks kind of got worn out. But in the ensuing couple of years, the partisans really spent a lot of time working up their infrastructure, their officer corps, kind of getting a more legitimate military force in place. At least that's my interpretation of the next couple of years.
Let me put it this way: the partisans are going to have a huge problem with the officer issue. Huge. The Chetniks also have a problem with the officer issue, because a lot of the officers are in POW camps. But the partisans have almost a complete lack of actual trained officers, and this shows, and this will show in their operations. They will get better fighters, but ultimately they're going to need serious English help in order to be more effective.
Oh, okay. I think that's a good place to hang right there. This is really good, Andre. I got to admit, we're learning a lot of stuff just talking about this stuff out loud. It's pretty nice.
What can I say?
So now I understand. Now I understand a lot of things that you're doing in your game too, because it didn't make much sense to me. It's like, oh, okay, you're doing that, and you're capturing that part. That's pretty good. All right, well, I got to go back to work, unfortunately, my friend. But we will revisit this on Sunday, and I guess we'll start the next chapter Sunday.
Well, I think that we can start discussing 1942.
Yes, because that pretty much takes us to the end of 41. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Good call on getting this done.
All the best, Barry, and thanks a lot.
Yes, well, I'll talk to you in, like, I guess that's 3 days from now, so I'll see you in 3 days.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.